Welcome to ENside Politics, the weekly podcast on everything you need to know about San Antonio politics. I'm Greg Jefferson, Metro Editor of the San Antonio Express News, and today I'm joined by Richard Webner, our transportation reporter. Good morning.
Good morning.
So, Richard, we have been talking now for about a year and a half about San Antonio to Austin commuter rail. What's interesting about this is we hadn't been talking about it at all since 2016, since the death of the Lone Star Rail District, which was created by the Texas legislature in the late 1990s. And its sole purpose was to create an Austin to San Antonio rail line. It spectacularly failed in that and went out of business in 2016. Why are we talking about rail now?
Well, there's a new effort, basically. You have Andy Brown, the Travis County judge, and Peter Sakai, the Bexar County judge, kind of joining together to try to get this launched again. You also have Melissa Haverda, who is, along with being a city councilwoman in San Antonio, is the chair of the board for AMPO, the Alamo Area Metropolitan Planning Organization, which basically decides which transportation projects in the local region can receive state and federal funding. And she's kind of throwing her weight behind the effort. You have a kind of a convergence of other things too. Under the Biden administration, the infrastructure bill passed, and that's created a lot of funding for rail projects across the U.S. So all those things are kind of coming together to create some amount of momentum. Exactly how much momentum, I guess, could definitely be argued. But Andy Brown, the Travis County judge, he sent a letter to state legislators asking for the project to be considered in the upcoming session. And the idea is that if the state devotes money to the project, they could receive a federal match. I think it's an 80-20 thing. So the federal government could end up providing 80% of the funding.
Now, it's been about a year and a half ago. I wrote about this at the time. So Andy Brown floated the idea. It seemed to kind of come out of nowhere, and it sounded it almost sounded like he was unaware of the San Antonio or the Lone Star Rail District and that entire effort. It sounded kind of like he woke up one morning and said, "Hey, wouldn't this be a great idea to have San Antonio to Austin rail?" I assume a lot more thought went into it than that. And my understanding is, so they've created County Judge Peter Sakai, Bexar County's county judge, and Andy Brown created an advisory group. Can you tell me a little bit about this and what they're doing? Yeah,
it's just an advisory committee, and I think it meets monthly. In terms of what they've done, apart from helping to draft that letter, I'm not sure if they've done all that much so far. Although, I think that it's still, they would describe it as just still being in the discussion phase. But there's at least one, and I think a couple people on that committee who had been with the Lone Star Rail District, so they're lending their expertise to try to get this effort moving.
So, I mean, regardless of how real this effort is, every time you talk about this particular effort, whenever you talk about San Antonio to Austin rail, there seems to be a lot of excitement in the public. You can kind of see it in social media, letters to the editor, that kind of thing. What's the crying need, do you think, for this rail service, commuter rail?
Well, basically anyone who has ever driven on I-35 between San Antonio and Austin would be able to answer that question, just that it's very painful to drive between them. The traffic is awful. This probably goes without saying, but this is one of the fastest growing regions of the United States. The population is booming and the highway infrastructure is under serious strain. TxDOT, the Texas Department of Transportation, is currently working to expand I-35 both in San Antonio and in Austin with these giant multi-billion-dollar projects, which those projects promise to help relieve the traffic strain. Although as of right now, they're causing more congestion.
I was going to say, like maybe a few years hence, but right now it's not so great. Yeah, you're talking about two projects in the San Antonio and Austin area that combined, I think their budgets are nearly $9 billion. So it's a lot of work, and it's highway expansion, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, there is one argument that to the extent that you expand highways, you just increase traffic flow. So it does seem like it's not a permanent fix. So maybe I can understand why we're talking about rail again, because you might need some alternative other than just more pavement. But I mean, this keeps going back. Whenever you talk about San Antonio to Austin rail, it keeps going back to UP, Union Pacific. So tell me what role they play in this. Yeah,
they play the key role, I would say. Basically, I think I could confidently say that Union Pacific is the real decision maker in terms of whether something happens. So the one rail track that runs between San Antonio and Austin is owned by Union Pacific. And there is a once daily Amtrak passenger train that runs along it, but it is primarily used for freight traffic. And it has become a more and more important for freight. What you see is, since the passage of NAFTA in the 90s, trade between Mexico and the United States has become even more interwoven, and especially coming through the port of Laredo, which, call it a port, is obviously an inland passage point over the border. So you see lots of manufactured goods. Part of it will be made in Mexico. Part of it will be made in the United States. And so often you'll see, for example, Toyota Tundras that are made in San Antonio. Parts of it are made in Mexico, and the parts are shipped here via that port of Laredo on Union Pacific's rail tracks. So basically, Union Pacific values that track a lot as a freight passage, and they don't want to mess that up by devoting it to passenger traffic. Yeah.
And I mean, I think one of their arguments historically, and I assume this is still the case, that say hypothetically they did reach some agreement to allow commuter rail on that line. That's just, that's freight that then has to go over to 35.
Yeah, that is the argument that they make.
Yeah, I mean, you're basically talking about dumping even more traffic onto 35. Is that, that argument seems to have a lot of saliency. I mean, any reason to think there's nothing to it?
Well, no, it's definitely, it makes sense. Although I think it's important to point out that the Lone Star Rail District effort failed in 2016 because Union Pacific pulled out. And the solution that the Lone Star Rail District had decided was most feasible was that they would actually build a new rail route that would kind of bypass the corridor running east along the path roughly of the 130 toll road that takes today. And Union Pacific had seemed to be on board with that. So basically Union Pacific would be running the freight trains through this easterly route, and the existing routes would be used for commuter rail. And that would also have the advantage of, people who live in various places along the corridor, they have to deal with the annoyance of the freight trains running over the road. So you have to wait for 20 minutes or whatever for the trains to go. So that would also provide the benefit of, and there's also the threat of the trains might derail, and there might be some sort of catastrophic derailment. So
okay, now how? So UP seemed to like the idea of, hey, if you want to build us a rail line, that's great. We'll consider that. How do you have a sense of how real that was at the time? I mean, where would the money have come from?
Well, yeah, it would have. If you talk to the people who are involved in the Lone Star Rail District who are now on the committee of the new effort, they will say that it seemed like it was real. Union Pacific really seemed to be on board. They had reached a memorandum of understanding. They had really seemed to have momentum. They had a financial structure worked out. I think it would have the various municipalities along the path would have contributed funding in some form or another. And as a result, you would have lots of stops. I think it was maybe 16 or 17 running all the way from south of San Antonio up to Georgetown, north of Austin. And you would have stops in all the municipalities along the way, and they would contribute funding. So I think it was a little different from the current funding structure that people are seeking, where it would be kind of like relying very heavily on federal funding.
Right. And with the change of administration coming, I mean, from Democrat Joe Biden to Republican Donald Trump, seems problematic to rely on federal funding. In general, I think Republican administrations, they just, they're less rail friendly than Democrats tend to be. I think that's generally true, and might definitely be true under Donald Trump. So, I mean, if what Andy Brown and Peter Sakai are talking about is a model that's going to be pretty heavily dependent on federal dollars, what now? You'd barely gotten out of the starting block. Are you having to restart now or no?
Yeah, that's a very good question. The article came out before Trump was elected, and I did ask them about that, and I think that they basically kind of skirted that question. I think that they would probably say that the infrastructure bill was passed. The funding is already there to some extent or another. But I also spoke with people who thought that it might become a bipartisan issue. For example, I spoke with Matt Makowiak. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Who's a kind of a Republican political consultant in Texas, and he thought that this might gain some force in the Texas legislature. I mean, anyone who drives up and down I-35 can agree that some sort of radical solution is necessary. And I mean, you can look to Florida, where there's a private rail that was built between I think Orlando and Miami, privately built, and that's obviously a red state now. So I think you might say that in certain circumstances in which it becomes a necessity, rail might gain Republican support.
Yeah. Now, the problem is the state lawmakers who are driving from San Antonio to Austin to go to the Pink Dome tend to be Democrats. Which is not the best party to belong to if you want something done in the state legislature. Is there? I know that TxDOT did, this was a number of years ago, they did a long-term rail study. Any idea whether that'll be updated? I mean, it seemed pretty friendly to the idea of a rail line extending from Austin down to San Antonio and to the border. Any idea whether that'll be updated at all or no?
Last I spoke with TxDOT, they had received grants from the federal government to begin studying the possibility of increasing rail service on various routes throughout Texas, although the San Antonio to Austin was not one of them. But I think that they are kind of preparing to seek funding to study the possibility. So obviously, I think it's important to emphasize all of these efforts are very much in their infancy. The Andy Brown, Peter Sakai effort is basically in committee phase. TxDOT is kind of seeking funding to begin studying this issue. So anyone who's hoping for rail between San Antonio and Austin should probably kind of try to be patient about it.
And at this point, so last year, I think TxDOT, and you reported this, TxDOT recorded nearly 200,000 vehicles passing along I-35 from San Antonio to Austin per day. And that was a 37% growth since 2013. My guess is it's only going to accelerate or get worse, but maybe accelerate a lot. So I guess where we can leave this is we know that traffic is only going to get worse on 35, and we really have no idea if there's going to be any San Antonio to Austin rail solution anytime soon.
Yes. And I think I would also like to bring up, people try to propose other solutions too. One of them I've heard is that many of the highways that are being expanded right now will include high occupancy vehicle lanes, otherwise known as carpool lanes. I've heard people propose the idea of you could end up devoting that lane to some sort of like rapid bus service where it wouldn't be a train, but it would basically be buses running very rapidly, very close to each other on that designated lane. So people are looking for various solutions to this problem, and I don't see anything being worked out anytime soon. Certainly not within the next couple of years. But there is a sentiment that congestion has gotten so bad that something has to happen. Basically, yeah.
Well, while I've got you here, I want to ask you about this story you did last month, which I thought was very good, about a new approach to parking at San Antonio International Airport. So let's start with kind of the big picture. What's different about parking at the airport now?
Yeah, so the airport, up until I guess about last month, had managed its own parking, which I guess has become increasingly unusual for airports to do that. And they decided to privatize it. And so in early 2023, I believe, if I have that timing right, they issued a request for proposals, basically asking private companies to submit proposals to take over the parking at the airport. One of their proposals, and the one that ended up prevailing under the scoring that they did, was from an old company called SP Plus, which manages the parking at airports throughout the U.S. So at the time when they selected SP Plus late last year, SP Plus was in the process of being acquired by a startup called Metropolis, which the way Metropolis works is when they manage parking anywhere, they have cameras, and the cameras, they look at your license plate when you drive in, and there's no gate, but what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to get on your smartphone and create a profile with them. You enter your license plate number and your credit card information so they know who you are. And then when you end up leaving, whether it's 15 minutes later or hours later or days later, they can say, okay, this car was in our lot for this amount of time and they'll be charged this amount, and they have your credit card and they'll charge you. And they tout the technology as being very convenient. So you can go to any Metropolis facility in the U.S. You don't have to worry about it. Just drive in, drive out, and then they'll charge you for how long you were there.
What happens if you don't create a profile?
So that's the problem. Is there are several class action lawsuits right now, and if you look online on social media, or if you look at Google Maps for these facilities, you'll see lots of people complaining. They'll say something like, "Oh, I just drove in to drop somebody off," or "I drove in and I drove out. I decided I didn't want to park there, and I ended up getting a bill in the mail for a $70 fee along with what I was supposed to pay in the parking." So there are 4 class action lawsuits against the company right now, kind of with complaints about that system.
And from your reporting, from your story, I understand that council was not aware of this lawsuit. How did that happen? Like, how did staff avoid telling city council about this major problem with one of their vendors?
Well, at the time, SP Plus had not been acquired, and the airport officials did reply, and they said, we were aware that SP Plus was in the process of being acquired. We vetted both of the companies, and we found nothing wrong. It was, if you look in the contract that council approved, it was kind of on page 92 of the contract. It said SP Plus is being acquired by this other company, and the city will be allowed to provide its consent. I think I should also bring up that someone made the point to me that parking companies tend to be the subject of many complaints. I guess it's just an industry where you have so many people using parking facilities that people are bound to complain about them. So if you speak with people from the airport, they're very excited about this new technology. They think it will be very efficient and provide a more seamless experience for people who are parking at the airport.
Now, so you went out to the airport. You tried this technology yourself. Kind of walk us through what you did and what it was like. Did you find it a convenient experience?
It worked for me. And I should add also that when I started reporting this story and I kind of went on Metropolis's website and I went to create a profile for myself, I realized that I had actually used it before at a parking garage in Austin. So I already had a profile and I didn't even remember doing that, which I guess is in its favor. I didn't have a bad experience with it or anything. I went to park at the airport for 20 minutes and I was charged the $3 that I was supposed to be charged. They did also charge me a 99-cent fee, which wasn't there before, which Metropolis added when they started doing the parking at the airport. So I was charged $3.99 for parking for 20 minutes. And yeah, it went fine for me. If you go to park at the airport now, what happens is where the gates are, they're covered with these kind of like purple kind of canvas boxes, I guess you could say, that just say, just drive in, and there's a QR code and you can scan it with your smartphone and you can use that to create a profile. And they would argue that it's very convenient. You don't have to get a ticket. You don't have to worry about carrying around a ticket. You don't have to put in your credit card at the end. You can just drive in and out.
Right. So as you noted, the city managed parking at the airport, which was kind of an anomaly for large cities and large airports. So they bring in Metropolitan. They didn't have to use an AI product. They could have gone with a traditional, parking operation. Why didn't they?
Well, basically, I think that they would say, we did this RFP process. We did it all by the books. I think maybe it was 4 companies that responded, and they scored it traditionally. They have their metrics for scoring the companies. They didn't score Metropolis. They scored SP+.
Right. Yeah. So Metropolis completed the acquisition after? Okay.
It had been,
the contract. Got it.
At the time that City Council approved the contract, the acquisition was underway, but it had not been completed yet. It had been reported on. So if any of this council members had searched SP Plus in Google News, there would have been an article saying Metropolis is preparing to acquire SP Plus.
All right. So what is it? What benefit is the city hoping to get from reliance on AI for its parking? Like, what would be better about this than just a traditional parking operation? Yeah,
I think that they would just say the convenience of it. One of their motivations also for seeking to have a private company take it over, I think, is just hoping there's a revenue sharing agreement, and I think that they hope it would be more efficient and they'll get some revenue out of it. But I think that they would tout the efficiency. I think that they would argue that this is it's new technology. It's more efficient. It can be more convenient for the people who are parking.
So for the $70 basically penalty if you don't fill out a profile, does the city get a share of that?
Well, I think I should say that it's unclear whether people who park at the airport who do not properly set up their account will receive that $70 fee. I believe that I tried asking about that and I didn't get a clear answer. They also, Metropolis in their response to me, suggested that they had reduced their fees. I think they said to something like 50% of the industry average. I was unable to get an exact number there. But so it's unclear whether people who park at the airport who do not properly set up their account will receive that fine. And I guess hopefully that's something I can find out in a follow-up article.
All right, cool. Richard Webner, thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the time this morning. And thank you for joining us. Once again, if you've not signed up for the ENside Politics newsletter, again, I cannot believe there's anybody left who hasn't done that, but rumor is there are a couple of you. Drop to the show notes. There's a link there. Click on the link and get signed up for the newsletter. And thank you very much. We'll see you next week.